Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of the Enzo Explores podcast, where I'm joined with my best friend and my roommate, Aaron Porter. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing good. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome, dude. So you're into psychology and all of that, but before we get into that, let's start with the Zevia test again.
All right,
we're here again. This is your first time trying the ginger, what's it called?
Ginger ale.
Ginger ale, yes.
Yeah.
Ginger ale.
I've tried most of the flavors.
Right. I got the orange one too. I think we had both of these on the last podcast, but we got to try it again for sure. See how you feel about it.
You can never go wrong with Zevia. That's what we've learned in this household.
Of course. So go ahead and pour like half the glass and we can share the other half. Unless you want all your drink.
I'm probably just going to take a sip.
Okay.
I might drink the rest later. We'll see.
Sure.
I didn't realize how much it fizzes up. It's kind of crazy. I think
fizzes a bit.
Yeah.
For the sponsor us, Zevia. All right.
I think they'll see this.
Yeah, the taste test. So you got ginger ale, I got orange. Cheers, buddy. Ooh. What does yours taste like?
I mean, it tastes like ginger ale.
Right.
But usually I feel like when I have ginger ale, it's a really powerful, like at least maybe this is just like the type of soda that it is. Like with Sprite, it's like McDonald's Sprite is known for having all that fizz. This feels very light, like a light ginger ale. So, I mean, it tastes just like ginger ale though. So, I mean, as always, it's like, from the first time when we tried the root beer.
Right.
I was shocked. I'm still shocked. It tastes good.
I think for me, you know how you have like Fanta or Crush, some of those other orange ones? They feel like artificial orange.
For sure.
Like it doesn't taste like a real orange. This one actually kind of tasted like I was biting into an actual real orange. That's like, it actually got that taste.
I'm telling you, they got to sponsor us now.
Yeah, I know. It's very fresh, bro. I feel like there's an orange in there, but all right. Well, that was good. I'm going to continue to have mine throughout the session, but...
Yeah, you might catch me pouring mine a little bit later. We'll see.
All right. Well, why don't you pour onto us a little bit about yourself and what is it that you do, who you are?
All right. Yeah. So I'm a third-year psychological sciences major at the University of California, Irvine. I am, and also like more specifically, I'm graduating in about a quarter. So I'm basically at the end of my degree now, where I've taken, all the classes that I kind of need to take. So that foundational knowledge that comes with a bachelor's degree is basically there. I have one more psychology course to complete in my next quarter.
So the rest GEs?
I've already completed all my GEs. Okay. They're like school requirements. So like criminology, urban planning, stuff like that, which is interesting stuff. I'm actually excited to learn about.
Which school is it in?
Social ecology.
Social ecology, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you know the difference between like social sciences, social ecology?
I don't think I would be able to say definitively, but I know social ecology deals with like more of, because there's urban planning, criminology, psychological sciences.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting mix.
Sure.
It kind of deals in education, law, ethics.
Yeah, because urban planning is not...
Yeah,
but there could be some psychology in urban planning in itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, for sure.
So I guess it's just the study of like human, like...
How do you design cities around human populations and stuff like that? Yeah. No, there's definitely elements of psychology involved. I mean, that's kind of for every subject that you could possibly touch on. I feel like psychology is a very broad...
Business to economics.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Psychology is a very broad field, and you kind of have to find your niche within psychology. That's why bachelor's degrees don't get you very far, because afterwards it's like, you have this broad knowledge of psychology, but in the workforce, you need something specific. You need to have a mastery of a specific domain of psychology. So for me in particular, my goal is in clinical psychology or counseling psychology, which is there's differences in the approach, but they're more or less topics on the same thing, which is like psychopathology.
Where psychology or psychiatrists and psychologists come in? Is that
Yeah, so psychiatry is...
I've never understood that.
Yeah, so psychiatry is in the field of medicine. So in order to become a psychiatrist, you have to be a medical doctor. So you go through med school, you get your MD, and then your specific residency is in psychiatry. So they're not very knowledgeable on assessment and diagnosis, like with the DSM, because the DSM-5 is the most recent edition, and that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that comes from the American Psychiatric Association, not the Psychological Association. So psychiatry actually has kind of, not a monopoly, but they have a hold on how diagnoses are given out for psychological disorders or psychopathology. So that's, yeah, in the field of psychiatry, I guess when I was like first starting off my journey into psychology, one of my dad's patients is a psychiatrist, and I had the opportunity to like get on the phone with him and talk with him about what my plans were for the future, because I was like, I'm interested in psychology, but I don't know if I want to go the psychiatry route or if I want to go the clinician route or the clinical psychology route, because the difference is in degree, it's in approach. And one of the things that he told me is that if you want to go into psychiatry, you have to recognize that you're a medical doctor first and a psychotherapist second. And for me, I figured that I appreciate and value and am passionate about psychotherapy. So this is, kind of not your traditional talk therapy. It's very evidence-based, and we'll talk about that later. But it's the approach isn't medical only, like psychopharmacology. So that's like SSRIs for depression, antipsychotics for psychotic disorders. Psychiatrists will deal with that. They usually deal with much more complicated cases, diagnoses of autism, and stuff like that. So yeah, they're very related though, very related. But usually clinical psychologists are more knowledgeable on the literature surrounding therapy, and psychiatrists are more knowledgeable on the field of medicine.
Okay.
That's the basic differences.
That's a good way to describe it. But is it addressing the same mental disorders?
Yeah, so both use the DSM.
Okay.
There are some conflicts within like the two domains. So
what does DSM stand for again?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders.
Okay.
Yeah, so the conflicts, and we're learning about this I'm taking a class called Personality Disorders. And one of the things that my professor, who's a clinical psychologist, brings up is that there's somewhat of a feud between a lot of researchers in the field of psychology and those who are responsible for the DSM in psychiatry over the modality with which, over the way that diagnoses are given out. So for example, with depression, you need to meet 5 out of 9 characteristics or symptoms for depression in order to be legally diagnosed. And so the problem that my professor brought up is, what if you have somebody who has 4 out of 9 of those symptoms, of those characteristics, and it's maladaptive, which means that it's harming them or others. It's something that can be treated effectively, and this person is suffering, and they really do need the help. What do you do if they meet 4 and not 5 of those characteristics? Like, why is it's so arbitrary to say 5 out of 9 is required for a diagnosis?
Right. And is it that is it possible that okay, sure, it's 4 today at the doctor's visit, but it could be 5 next week kind of thing, or
yeah, so
it's going to develop more so that later on it could be 5?
So yeah, somebody asked a question in class, which was like, so how do you as a therapist approach this? If you encounter a client who has 4 out of 9 of the characteristics and you really want to give them help, because here's the big problem. It's if you don't meet the diagnosis requirements from the DSM, the insurance company will not provide for the therapy. So as a client, even though you would really benefit from therapy, and that healing process would be appropriate, and the therapist believes that the therapy is necessary, if you don't meet those criteria, the insurance company will reject the claim. So one of the questions was, what do you do as a therapist? How would you approach the situation? And I think it obviously varies therapist to therapist, but sometimes you might walk your client through and really make sure that they don't have a fifth characteristic, because it might be the case that they do, but they don't know how to communicate that effectively. And that's where therapy comes in. That's where you as a therapist and your interviewing approach need to hone in on making sure that you're not leaving anything behind in your assessment of your client.
Is there a problem for overprescribing, like giving 6 when they only have 3 or 4? Or is it not that
I don't
easy?
think I'm like knowledgeable enough to know. I am still an undergrad, so I have no experience with with assessment, but I suppose it could be.
Would it be easy to let that slide, or are these pretty clear, like, kind of indicators and markers? Like, what are the markers?
Yeah, usually they're pretty clear. I'd have to look up specifically just so I don't mess it up. Like for depression, for example.
Yeah. Is it stuff like, oh, you're tired, you're anxious, things like that, or?
Those are symptoms of depression, but I don't know if that's how they're articulated in the DSM.
Indicators.
Yeah. So I can look that up really quick.
Sure.
But let's see. So yeah, okay, so oh yes, and there's time periods too. So that's usually how they specify it. So like if you have this set of symptoms or this symptom for this length of time, then that's how you qualify for this. I believe for schizophrenia it's 6 months for certain parts of it. So yeah, so for example, some of them are like 5 or more depressive symptoms for greater than or equal to 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that why they're always having you check that off at like a physical? I remember like one time for me, I went to just like what are those called? The general checkups. What do they call those?
Oh, like a physical?
Physical,
Yeah,
just a physical.
yeah.
And I think one time my doctor noticed that I was anxious because I had gone to the gun range and blown my hearing out. So yeah, I was anxious. I thought I lost my hearing forever, right? But they marked me down as an anxious type. So ever since then, on my record, they always hand me a theme like, how much sleep are you getting? Are you feeling anxious? Like how many times in a week? You know, are you feeling like depressed? How many times in a week? And I'm like, guys, you know, my ear was blown out that day. You know, like this isn't who I am. Like you know, I'm mostly fine. You know.
Yeah. In all honesty, I wouldn't be able to say from like the medical perspective why they give out those assessments, but yeah, typically when it comes to depression, you like. I as a therapist, you should know the DSM criterion like pretty well.
Sure.
I'm still an undergrad, and we don't have that sort of. I'm still in my very all-around approach to psychology. That's something that I'd get into in grad school. So I just have my experience from the courses that I've taken, like abnormal psychology. But it's definitely important, and it is linked to the medical field. And so for medical doctors to want to have an understanding of your psychological well-being before treating you physically, that's a good thing. So there's this model that we use, an approach to therapy within clinical psychology called the biopsychosocial model. And so it used to be that we use the medical model, which basically says that disorders are merely caused by physical impairments, whereas the biopsychosocial model says there's biological components to disorder, there are psychological components to disorder, and there are sociological components to disorder.
Sociological, like society.
Yeah,
like
so
environment,
your relationships,
okay.
your community, where you like the places that you live and experience.
So biological, psychological, and sociological.
Yep.
What's the difference between biological and psychological? Is
So
one mental, one
so
physical?
a key component first is that it's important to know is everything psychological is biological.
Okay.
So ultimately, your brain is extremely complex. It is the most complex thing in the known universe. And all of the way that your thoughts work, the way that your brain works, all of that is a biological process. It's not this like ethereal concept, right? As like traditionally it might have been considered. It's neurons firing in your brain in specific patterns. and it's an extremely complex thing, but it's all biological. But the reason why we distinguish it is because it's about cognition. So with biological stuff, it might be like maybe a certain part of your brain is damaged.
Okay.
That's biological.
Yeah.
Now psychological might be your patterns of thinking are disordered or maladaptive. And that's different from biological, because it's not necessarily that something is injured. It's just that a pattern is harmful cognitively.
Okay.
So,
and we form those patterns as we grow up ourselves. We're doing that?
It could be formed, and this is why it's biopsychosocial, because it's never usually just one
okay.
component. It's
like a Venn diagram.
Exactly,
Okay.
and they overlap, and there's
I love Venn diagrams.
there's never one specific reason for anything. There's always a range of components that factor into why you might have or develop psychopathology, and that's something we'll get to later. But yeah, I think back to the introduction.
Sure.
I'm also a ABA therapist. So that stands for ABA, is Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy. So that is evidence. It's an evidence-based intervention, like therapy group that's geared towards behavioral symptoms. So typically it's used for those with autism, autism spectrum disorder, because there are some maladaptive behavioral traits that come with having ASD. And so the approach is ABC. That's the acronym. It's antecedent behavior consequence. So antecedent is like, what are the things that you pick up on that you notice come right before a behavior? So let's say you have a client that's like twitching, and you know that when they start to twitch their pen or something like that, usually what comes after is that they get up out of their seat and bolt and leave or elope. The antecedent to the behavior would be the eloping, the getting out of the area. The antecedent would be the twitching of the pen, because it's a pattern you notice is associated with the behavior. And then the consequence is, what are you going to do to intervene? And that's what we do as ABA therapists, is we notice patterns of behavior, know certain problem behaviors, and then apply interventions in order to control or reorder behavior from being negative, from being problem behaviors, to being acceptable or normalized behaviors in society.
Yeah.
And so we help those with ASD and other behavioral dysfunctions, like generalize their learned behaviors into society. And that's all following operant conditioning, which is if you study like intro to psychology, that's like one of the very basic.
Operant conditioning, is that like the whole idea that you like reward things?
Yeah,
like, stuff
it's
like that?
all based on reward.
Okay.
So motivation and reward. So the idea is that, if you've ever heard of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement.
Right, that's the word I was looking for.
A lot of the different intervention techniques that we use are predicated on reinforcement techniques
So
to motivate our clients to achieve a certain goal.
And positive reinforcement is giving something when they do it successfully.
Yeah,
And
so
then
you're adding something.
You're adding something.
So that's the
Okay.
distinction, is that positive doesn't necessarily mean good. Like in that
Okay.
sense, it's not positive in the sense that something is
Sure.
good. It's not negative in the sense that something's bad. It's positive in the sense that you are introducing something to an environment. And negative is you are taking something away from an environment. So positive reinforcement would be like, good job, buddy. You're like introducing a positive informational feedback into the environment. The client's gonna take that as something rewarding, and they're going to be motivated to perform that good behavior or to not perform a bad behavior because of the reinforcement that they get.
Is the motivation from positive reinforcement similar to the motivation that comes from negative reinforcement? Or is
Yes,
one
they're all related. Positive reinforcement, I think, generally is the most effective, but it's not always like what you use depends on your situation. You need to be able to apply them appropriately. So for some clients, they might appreciate, like let's say a client has a very strong stimulation to hearing, like loud noises.
Okay.
So they're in a room and there's a TV on and the program is really loud and you can see that they're distressed and they're trying to cover their ears, for example, negative reinforcement would be like to turn off the TV. So what you're doing is you're taking something away from the environment that's causing them difficulty and harm. And so that's kind of like what we mean by negative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're definitely related. I believe positive reinforcement has the most effect. Like it's proven to be the most successful in motivating people to do things.
Sure.
Just in general, because operant conditioning just applies to everyone, not just those with autism.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so I've been doing that for about a year now, and it's been a really rewarding experience. Obviously, there's some tough moments, but it's definitely, I think, made me more empathetic, more patient, more aware of people's struggles. Because I think you don't fully understand the impact of cognitive distress, of mental distress, until you see how it affects people and you try to help them through it. Because the more you try to help somebody through their distress, the more you realize that all of the distresses that you experience, that you go through, you haven't experienced at all. Other people are struggling with things that you have never experienced before. And I think in placing yourself in those environments, it encourages you to be more careful with how you treat people in their positions in life, because you just don't know what somebody's going through, So I think if there's anything I've taken away from my job, it's that psychological distress is extremely, extremely taxing. And it's something that I think I'm very passionate about addressing in my career and in my future. Because I think it's something that, as we'll get to in a little bit, is kind of stigmatized within the church, the Catholic Church. And that's my faith, And so, and not just in the Catholic Church, in just religion in general, it's also just pretty stigmatized. It's also because it's a newer science. Like psychology isn't super old. So a lot of the developments are kind of new, at least in the grand scope of science.
Sure.
So there's obviously going to be some stigma surrounding something that's developing. But I think it's very valuable. That's kind of why I'm here, is I want to talk about why that's important to me. Like with regards to mental health stigma, I want to tell a story to start this off.
Sure.
So I started off my journey at UCI as a computer science major.
Okay.
So in high school, figured a couple of things. One, that I love technology and that I love computers. I've like built computers growing up. I played video games and stuff like that. So I always thought that was going to be my thing. And in my high school, we didn't have a computer science course. Or we did, but I don't think I was able to take it at the time that it was implemented. So I didn't end up getting the opportunity to expose myself to like computer programming beforehand. And it's something I wish I had done before, just so I didn't have to figure it out in college. But when I came here, I was a computer science major, and I went that path for a year and a half. And at some point, along the same time as my conversion to Catholicism, I started to realize I started to question, what am I going to do in my future? Like, am I content programming at a desk or in an office setting or at my home virtually for the rest of my life? Just, I'm someone who is motivated by meaning. And so I was asking myself the question, can I find meaning in what I do? And every time I imagined a future in that career, I couldn't see it. It was depressing. It brought me it took away a lot of motivation for me. And I started to notice that in my grades too. And once the grades I started to notice it in my grades and just in my thoughts, that's when it became too far for me. Because I think up until a certain point, it was, well, I might not like it that much, but I'm doing good. And maybe I can be very good at this. And even if I don't like it, I at the very least can get by, and I can provide a future for my family. But then, the software engineering market kind of is on a downhill trend. I'm not passionate or motivated about this, and I'm starting to see it in my grades. It's all so much for me. And also too, it's like, I want to glorify God in my profession, and I couldn't see a way to glorify God in my profession, or at least in computer science.
Yeah.
Now, I'm certain that many people can. I just couldn't find a way that I would be able to. And so I thought back to, okay, well, what do I do now? And my favorite class in high school was AP Psychology. I loved it. I took it very late, though, in high school, so it wasn't something I considered starting college. But when I was rethinking or thinking about switching majors, it came up again, and I was like, you know what? Here's my thought process. I can either kind of slave away at what I'm doing right now, just get by, and just spend the rest of my life doing something I'm not very interested in. And at least it might pay the bills, and kind of have my ceiling low, Or I can do something I'm passionate about, that I love, that might be a little bit more risky, but my ceiling's up here because I have that motivation. And I weighed out the options, I prayed about it a lot, and I came to the conclusion that, despite the fact that I'm already a year and a half in to school, I'm gonna do this. So I ended up switching my major. It's been a little over a year since, I think. Yeah, a little over a year since.
Yeah.
And I have no regrets.
Nice.
I've loved it. I'm graduating in a quarter.
Yeah, I've always heard
Not at the
about-
end of this quarter, but the quarter after.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm just, it went by so fast. It feels like I just switched over.
Right.
But, I've loved every step of the way. And it's been a blessing in my life to know that, in my future, I have something that I can glorify God in, that I'm passionate about, and that if I set my sights on that, it's the being able to provide, the being able to, bring in money is going to come, as long as I am dedicated and work hard. So that's been a blessing to me. But one of the things, so back to the story I was going to tell.
All right, and
Nice.
we are back. And before we get into your story, we do have a message from our sponsor, Enzo Beats Entertainment. That's right, guys. If you are a graduating senior in college, a graduate, fourth-year graduate, master's graduate, any kind of graduate, your buddy, me, will take your grad photos. So if you're in the Orange County area, for a small price of $40 an hour, I will do your photos. So
If you can see the beautiful quality of this camera right here, then that's basically what you can expect.
it gets even better on the photography setting. So that's our sponsor for today, along with hopefully Zevia one day. But
we'll keep praying.
Right. All right. So into your story. Go ahead.
Yeah. So okay. I don't mean to expose my friend. I'm sure he'll be okay with this. I'm not going to say his name or anything, but I have a good friend of mine, really good friend of mine, amazing guy. He's Baptist, or at least I think he would probably say non-denominational, but his leanings are more Baptist. And so he's responsible for helping me revitalize my faith and get back in. So for those of you who don't know, I grew up Protestant, mostly non-denominational, and then converted to Catholicism a year ago. So alongside that journey, he helped me kind of go from an agnostic viewpoint to okay, I want to actually look into faith now. And when I had told him, and this was I had already made the decision to go the Catholic route, right? I already had figured in my heart and mind that the Catholic Church is the church that Christ founded. And he knew that from me. But I communicated to him, and I told him that I was switching my major to psychology. And I'll never forget the first thing he said, and it made me upset, because he was like, "Do you really believe that stuff?" And I was like,
okay.
I remember being really frustrated, because it's like, how am I going to communicate the way that this makes me feel? It's like, not only is it real, but it's impossible for it not to be real. I don't know how to properly articulate this, but it is so real that his own thoughts and feelings about psychology are in and of itself psychological.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's so, that's how we think, that's how we reason, that's how we behave. That's the study of all of the complexities of the mind. And I think that a lot of Christians, of every branch, of every sect, of every denomination, they all have this kind of negative outlook on psychology. Because
some people, and
not all, but
in
yeah,
there's going to be some people in each
oh yeah,
denomination.
And just in all religions too.
Sure.
I think it's kind of unavoidable. But just even beyond anecdotally, I'm bringing up something. I wrote a paper on this for one of my classes, this very topic, and one of the studies that I came across was done at Stanford University in 2007. And I'm quoting from the study. It says, in one sample, 30% of people with a mental disorder reported having a negative experience within the church. And that's specifically talking about the Catholic Church, indicating being abandoned, being accused of having a demon, or being told that sin was the cause of their illness.
30%, you said?
30%.
Okay.
So we're going to get to this a little bit later and how I'm going to connect theology with psychology and why that's very valuable and why it's inappropriate to separate them completely because they're not distinct from each other. Or they are distinct from each other, but they're not separable from each other. So 30% of people reported having a negative experience. That's high. Yeah. I would love for that to be a lot lower because think about it this way. Psychological distress, the way that you think, the way that you perceive something, if there's a roadblock to perceiving something as true, good, or beautiful, as you would want somebody to experience with the church, then you would hope that that roadblock is cleared, right? And so what happens is you'll have people with anxiety, you'll have people with trauma, especially trauma related to the church, for example. Maybe they grew up and there was a bad relationship with a priest, or maybe their parents had a bad example of faith, right, in their family growing up.
It's very common.
Yeah, no, for sure. And because of that trauma, because they carry those experiences and the weight of those experiences with them, they view the church negatively. And so what happens is, if you come to a priest, if you come to a layperson, and you express to them these traumas related to the church, and they say as according to the study, being accused of having a demon or being told that sin is the cause of their illness, right? How is that going to make that person feel? Are they going to feel welcomed in the church? Or are they going to feel alienated and isolated and pushed away from the church, like you don't belong here? And so the approach matters. The approach matters. Because I'm not going to make the argument that sin and the demonic don't have a role in psychological disorder, because I do believe that they do. But I'm not going to make the argument that, one, it's the reason always for psychological disorder, because that's not true. And I'm also not going to make the argument that it's even mostly the reason, because I don't think it is. I think it's very niche. And you'll see this too with exorcists. If you ever listen to exorcists or them talk about the faith, the criteria to meet with an exorcist, to actually see an exorcist, is pretty substantial. You have to see, I think you literally have to see a psychiatrist and have all of the psychological components cleared before you can even be considered for an exorcism or an evaluation by an exorcist. Because the church, in its wisdom, recognizes that psychological disorder and psychopathology, and I'm going to use that word a lot, and we're going to get to it a little bit. So I think it's important that I define that right now. So psychopathology is the modern term that we use. You can also use abnormal psychology. Basically what it means is, and I'll split it up, it's psychological, that's the psycho part. That's according to the mind, right? And then pathology is illness or disease, right? So psychopathology is illness of the mind, disease of the mind.
So mental illness.
Mental illness.
Okay.
Yeah, and psychopathology is the clinical term. That's the the appropriate term that's used in literature and just in the field in general. So I'm going to be referring to that a lot. If I say psychopathology, that's what I mean. I mean somebody's experience with illness in their mind. And so kind of back to what I was saying, most distress is not demonic. Most mental distress is not demonic. It's really important that I make that and emphasize that and make that clear. And also to say that those who experience psychopathology, those that have mental illness, are not bad people. That's a huge thing that you learn when you study psychology. And it's emphasized in almost every class that I take. Is just because you experience mental illness does not make you a bad person. It doesn't mean that anything you did was something wrong. It could be the case that, you know, that you are a bad person, but it's not a causal relationship. You know, in the same way that, like, for example, if you have a professing Christian who's a murderer, that murderer is not an accurate representation of the Christian faith. You know what I mean? So it's not appropriate to say that because there are people who are like maybe criminals who have like maybe antisocial personality disorder or commonly known as psychopathy, they're psychopaths. Just because they get a lot of media attention for their wrongdoings, and they kind of in this media space, in the popular culture, represent psychological disorders, it should not be generalized to all those who experience mental illness. Mental illness is something like you have let's say the flu, or you have like maybe an illness with your kidney or a problem with your heart, a congenital heart defect. Those are illnesses you didn't necessarily do anything. You know, there might have been like things that you did that contributed to having those illnesses, but that doesn't make you morally responsible for those things. And that's why it's inappropriate to say that someone's sin is the cause of their mental illness. And that's why it's really harmful.
But I mean, there is some bridge though, like you're saying, right? In the sense that, like, you know, if I'm consistently choosing to do actions that I know aren't good for myself, that may be harming my own body and whatnot, and that is, I know it's not good for me, and if I continue to fall into that, then obviously that's going to have like a negative mental effect on me, right?
Yeah,
so where's the bridge between all that?
Yeah, so just like when you go to a doctor and maybe like maybe like you bad nutrition. So like your diet's not appropriate, like you're not listening to your doctor, maybe your doctor tells you like less sodium intake, right? And you continue to eat foods that are high in sodium. And then that's kind of like you're contributing to worsening your illness or progressing towards an illness. It is similar in certain aspects of psychopathology, where like if you continue to feed into your anxious thoughts, they are going to become worse. So yeah, there is some relationship there, for sure. But it's not always the case, and it's important to recognize that oftentimes those who struggle with breaking out of those habits, they need therapy. That's why therapy is important, is because depression, for example, is a cycle. The symptoms worsen themselves. That's the nature of the symptoms, right? Is that if you are alone in your depression will get worse. And so the intervention is, especially with therapy, is like, hey, I'm an outsider. You are experiencing depressive symptoms. Let me help you break that loop. And that's where therapy comes in, why it's important, is because, you know, there's a very big movement, and you think of figures like Andrew Tate, for example, or just like this, you know, this red pill movement, for example, where they'll tell you stuff like depression isn't a thing, it's not real, or it's just, or like break out of your depression, you know, stuff like that. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. They simplify depression, and they don't recognize how harmful it actually can be in creating these loops of these cycles of negative emotion and depression. So oftentimes you do need somebody to kind of knock on the door and get you to recognize that, one, there's an issue, there's a problem, and it's harming you, and two, what are the steps that you can take, and how can you be guided in approaching a solution towards those things. So I think that kind of brings me to what I wanted to talk about too, which is the mind-body connection. So we've been talking a lot about the connection between like the medical field and psychology. So I think one thing that's really important to note is that a lot of people have this idea that when we talk about psychology, we're talking about something abstract. That's something that well, your thoughts don't actually really matter that much, right? They're just thoughts. That's not true. Your thoughts have such a large effect on your health, your physical well-being. And so in classes that I've taken, like health psychology, or in a class that I'm taking, I'll touch on a little bit later, called health and social relationships, what you'll find is that your perception of support or your perception of certain things, your negative emotions, play into your physical well-being. So a good example is related to stress. A lot of people hear stress kills, right? Which is true. However, it's not necessarily that the stress itself kills, it's the perception of the stress that kills. So for example, let's say that, and so evolutionarily too, because this is important, stress is meant to combat like emergency situations. Like I'm being chased in the wild by like a coyote and I'm a small animal and I need to escape. So your body shuts down all unnecessary function through the stress response in order to get out of that situation and flee. What happens with the human species is that we can inflict stress unnecessarily upon ourselves through like our worry about the future, anxiety, times where we're not in immediate threat or danger. But because of our patterns of thinking, we're activating our stress response way more than we're meant to. And that's what kills us. The negative effects of stress kill us. Stress developed as a positive thing. It's the reason why we're able to adapt and survive, you know, and why all prey doesn't just die out.
That whole perception thing that you're bringing up is actually something that helped me a whole lot when you first mentioned it to me, because as I was telling you, you know, back in fall quarter, it was quite a hard time for me where I was having a lot of anxiety. I was stressing a lot. I was losing sleep, and a big part of losing sleep was just that positive feedback loop of I have anxiety, I'm anxious, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight, and then how am I going to feel about tomorrow, and this and that, and then what I'd asked you about it, and then what you said was, well, you know, you're telling me about a study of like those who perceived stress as good were fine generally, and then those who perceived stress as bad literally had like years cut off from their life or whatnot and died from that stress.
Yeah, so the specific study, and I'm not going to have like, because that was a while ago when I learned about the study, but I can generally kind of recall what the study was about. So the idea is that you do the study of people, those who perceive stress positively, so that their perception of stress is like, this stress is going to make me a stronger person. This stress is going to allow me to learn and adapt and become better from it. That's like a positive perception of your stress. So like maybe you're studying for an exam and you're experiencing all this stress and the weight of like, I have this exam tomorrow, it's causing me a lot of stress. It means a lot for my grade. That's the stress, okay? Your body is experiencing the stress reaction. So sympathetic nervous system activated, you know, all of your cortisol's up, all your stress hormones are up, your body's in fight or flight mode. All of that's happening. Now your perception of the stress is important, because if you have that positive perception of the stress, you are mitigating or lessening the effects of the negative symptoms of stress. So what the study found is that those who perceived their stress as positive, and the way that they did this is it's kind of an interesting way of conducting a study, but like and obviously this is an ethical study, but they assessed people's perspectives on their stress. And then after the study, I forget exactly how many years after the study or how many months after the study, but they checked the death records of those who were a part of the study and found that that those who perceived their stress as positive actually had the same death rate as those who didn't experience stress at all. As opposed to those who perceived their stress as negative, as harmful, had a substantially higher death rate post-study. And so that's been replicated many times. It's pretty like concrete.
Well, it's, in my own perspective, or in my own experience with all of that, like the way that I started to stress less about like lack of sleep, about how I was feeling throughout the day, and how I was able to break out of that cycle is tell myself that the reason that I'm experiencing this is because it's going to benefit me in the future in some way. So here's one way that I've found peace in it was so last summer, right? Kind of when I started dating Fran, you know, some of the things that we'd pray together is, you know, at least like for me as a guy, I'd pray, you know, I want to be a loving brother, a loving son, but in the future, if it's God's will, I want to be a loving father and a loving husband, right? And I'd pray that, and I would also recognize that like that doesn't happen overnight, right? And God's gonna send you challenges, and He's gonna send you different things that are gonna grow you and shape you into who that is, right? You think of your own father, and as I'm living my life now, I realize he wasn't just born at that stage. He had to go through his own things too, that now I'm going through in myself. So one thing that I realized was, okay, I'm losing a lot of sleep, man. Like throughout this month, it's like straight, like it feels like it's just day after day, and I'm losing sleep, and I'm kind of like losing my mind almost a little bit. I'm just like, you know, it wasn't like, on a grand scheme of things, I don't know if it was like really that severe or that bad, maybe compared to people who had like severe depression, but it felt pretty bad, you know, it was pretty bad anxiety. But then I started to tell myself, well, there's going to be a point where I'm going to be a father, and I'm going to have a child, and that baby is just born, and there's going to be sleepless nights in the first first few months of that baby's life. And then I realized, you know, what's happening now to me right now is it gives me like kind of an experience of that already, or it gives me a perspective like, okay, now I know what it's like to function on a day with only 5 hours of sleep. You know, now I know what it's like to wake up 5 times in the middle of the night and still have to function through that day.
It's going to prepare you from when it's necessary.
It's preparing me for what's necessary. And I had asked God for that. I asked God, can I be a loving father and a loving husband? And you look at what does it mean to be a father? It means to be strong. It means to be patient. It means to sacrifice, you know. It means to love at a greater capacity.
Yeah, right.
And then I realized, okay, God was handing me this experience so that that I would grow in that identity when I get there, right? And then I'm growing now, and so now, like even in my here's one experience when I was at the Lawanig Winter Retreat. That night, so last year's winter retreat, I got like 4 hours of sleep, and I was just stressing the whole day. But this year's winter retreat, I got 4 hours of sleep again, but I kind of went through like days where I knew like, okay, I'm gonna get through this day. You know, it's not the end of the world. You know, I'm just gonna allow myself to be happy. I know that this like is preparing me for situations where maybe I have an important like assignment at my job, and I can't just call off. You know, I can't just skip out on that day. I have to just show up, and that makes me stronger. And I'm realizing, okay, I'm able to combat this anxiety about lack of sleep with this perspective shift that this is actually growing me. And it's been positive.
Yeah, here's the amazing thing. Is like, and I'll talk about this later when I talk about social relationships. It's the perception. You don't actually have to be less stressed. You know what I mean? So like, for example, both of those times at retreat, you got 4 hours of sleep. The difference wasn't in how much sleep you got.
No.
The difference was in how you perceived or how you approached the situation. And the amazing thing is the health benefits come from your perception. So even though you got 4 hours of sleep both times, your body is healthier because of your perception. And that's why psychology is really important in your physical health. And so the mind-body connection is this idea that your brain is connected to the rest of your body. And the way the rest of your body functions has a lot to do with how your brain functions. And so there's a specific subset of psychology called psychoneuroimmunology. So that's a very big word.
Yeah, you guys are like the champions of coming up with big words over there.
100%. It sounds really cool though.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll give it that. It makes me sound
in
cool.
economics, we just got like opportunity costs, supply and demand, you know?
I think it has to be simple or else like, you know, you just...
Ding, ding, ding. That's what we're doing over there. You know?
It's kind of like the joke where like, I feel like business majors and psychology majors, we have like similar amounts of homework.
Yeah.
But you guys get the reputation of like the coloring books for homework.
Right.
Because of that and stuff. Because we sound cool.
Yeah.
And you guys don't sound cool.
It's dumb because there are business majors, but then there's accounting majors. And what I was doing is like, okay, accounting homework is not hard. You're just adding. There's no calculus. There's no physical equations you have to do. You're just adding numbers.
Yeah.
But the hard part is knowing when to add the numbers, understanding legal codes and all of that. So we're not just putting blocks, you know, we're not putting a square through the square hole.
You're not building a Lego set?
Yeah, no, it's harder. But
That's
as
good.
you were saying.
Yeah, so psychoneuroimmunology. So let's break that down because it's, again, psychology, we love like combining three things.
Right.
You know, we got like biopsychosocial. We have like the dark triad.
Not real words.
Yeah. We have like the dark triad, which is related to like, you know, like mental disorder and psychopathology, which there's approaching literature for the dark tetrad. So maybe we're upgrading from 3 to 4 now.
Jordan Peterson talk about that many times.
So we're upgrading from 3 to 4. Back to psychoneuroimmunology. So psycho, just like before, psychological, according to the mind, the brain. Neuro, this is your nervous system. So we're talking about the fact that your brain is connected to your nervous system. So that's not just in your brain. Obviously, your brain, that's a big part of your nervous system. But you also have your central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, all that good stuff that goes throughout your body, why you feel pain, sensation, stuff like that. All important. And immunology, your immune system.
Okay.
So this is really important. Because
like the same kind of immune system that's going to fight off a flu kind of immune system?
That's exactly right.
Okay. I'm glad that you broke it up in blocks because I do feel like a child now. I put the square in the square hole. I just put the ball in the circle hole and the triangle in the triangle hole.
Yeah, so essentially the idea is your brain is a control center, right? Okay. Like your body acts based off of the messages and stuff that is sent through your brain. So let's say you have some sort of dysfunction or bad pattern of thinking in your brain. It can affect your immune system, for sure. And that's a big topic in health psychology, is this idea that your thoughts play a role in your ability to fight off disease and illness and bacteria. And there's a lot of studies to support that.
Right, so when you say that, obviously, okay, so you say like the brain's a control system. Obviously I can't say, okay, hair, grow 10 feet longer, right? You know, I can't control like, okay, blood, go through this cell and that cell, you know, this and that. Like blood, you go right, blood, you go left kind of thing. Like obviously I can't do that, but you're telling me that I can send messages still to like, how does that work?
Yeah, so like your immune system, so for example, I mean, you have like T cells, natural killer cells, B cells, these are all like cells in your blood and in your body that are like in your immune system, they fight off bacteria, they fight off disease and illness. And your body's ability to fend off those illnesses has a lot to do with the state and the strength of your mind. Because if your brain is inhibited in how it's able to communicate those messages to the immune system, then you're going to have a weaker response to illness and disease.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, okay, it is. Yeah. So like, what's a good example? I'm trying to think of a good example to use. You could think of.
I have a question.
Kind of blanking.
Maybe it can help. So I remember like one time you were telling me that actually, I don't know if it was you, maybe it was my brother or my mom, but someone was telling me that like if you're stressing about something, you can like tell yourself like, okay, stop thinking in that pattern. You can like break yourself out of the pattern and repattern things. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes, kind of. Yeah. So you bring up stress. That's important. Yeah. I think I can relate it to stress a lot. So again, it goes the perception stuff. The perception stuff. The reason why your perception on stress matters is because your body, the brain is connected to your immune system through the stress cycle. So it's called the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical system.
Okay.
That's like the long,
Sure.
that's the long like term for it. So it's the idea that the hypothalamus, which controls a lot of like
Hippopotamus.
I'm a little close,
Okay.
but a little bit different.
Hypothalamus.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the hypothalamus,
your
the
brain.
pituitary gland,
Okay.
and the adrenal gland, they're connected, and they're a part of the stress response. They're responsible for the stress response. So I'm not going to get into specifics here. One, because I'm not a professional and I've taken classes on it. I'm not like an educator. And two, because I just don't think it's
endocrinology, right? That's like different stuff.
yeah, kind of, yeah. So, and two, it's just like I don't know if it's relevant.
Sure.
But basically, take my word for it, because the literature is pretty substantially conclusive about this, is that your perception on stress affects how the physical components of the stress cycle operate, and therefore your perception on stress is positive, your cortisol levels go down, other aspects and symptoms of the stress response go down, and therefore your body's immune system is able to do what it needs to do.
Okay.
And stress, which is a psychological component, if you feed into that stress and if you allow it to take over, then it's going to negatively impact your immune system's response. And that's kind of the mind-body connection. The reason why I brought it up is just to address that.
1 second. Can I change it right quick?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the reason why I bring up the mind-body connection is because you don't want to ignore the fact that your thoughts they don't just matter from a moralistic perspective, in the sense that, I want to be a good person, or I want to treat other people with respect, and therefore I have to think and behave a certain way. But also that the way that you perceive yourself, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, it affects your physical health too. So for those that are motivated by, I want to be healthy, I want to live a healthy lifestyle, I want to be energized, I want to, take on my day with success, and I want to feel good. Your thoughts they're a good place to start. The way that you think and perceive your health, your thoughts, they matter, and they're going to make you a healthier person. And so I think that the field of health psychology is amazing. I think it's substantial.
Practically, what does that look like? Like when I wake up and start my day, what do I do?
Yeah, good question. Think about the opportunities. Set goals for yourself, right? Even just doing something like that, journaling, those are all interventions that can help with your health. They can aid in your health because they might reduce stress. Maybe you wake up in the morning and everything's cluttered, and your mind too, and you don't know what you want to do that day, so you kind of just wing it. It's like that's gonna give your mind a reason to stress out, because it's gonna be like, I don't know what's next, I don't know what to do, and then when it comes time to that, like you got to do that next thing, all of a sudden you don't have a plan, and your body will stress, and your mind will stress, and your body will feel the effects of that stress. But if you wake up in the morning and you set your goals for the day, all of a sudden it's not as surprising to you, and you're able to approach it with a plan, and your mind isn't as prone to stress, and so therefore you are a healthier person. And I think intuitively a lot of people know this to be true. It's not like anything I'm saying is like shocking necessarily, but it's just a lot of people don't make that connection that their thoughts matter to their health, because our thoughts are so like, it's like breathing. You know what I mean? Like our mind is just something that we've always had, obviously, and so we don't, like with maybe you stubbed your toe, like what happened. With your mind, it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint what's wrong.
Sure.
Because it's very complex, and it's psychological. It's not something that like you feel it in a different way. Sure. It's impacted in a different way. So
it can be impacted by so many things, like you were saying, the biopsycho.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And all of them contribute to each other. Again, so like your social environment contributes to your psychological well-being, which then contributes to your biological well-being. Your biological well-being contributes to your psychological. So like some people genetically they have a stronger predisposition to depression or anxiety. And because of that genetic predisposition, they may be more likely to develop psychopathology because of their genetics and that's the biological component. It's unfortunate, but
So
that's a factor.
I know you want to get into other stuff, but if I could ask a question on that, like,
Yeah.
when it comes to those inclinations, right? How much is there a percentage that like is generally like, you know,
Oh, yeah.
40% of it comes from genetics, 60% of it comes from like you know, nurture versus nature.
Yeah.
Like, so can you apply that to this mental health or
Definitely.
diagnoses? Like, how
Definitely.
much is which one?
Yeah. So the nature nurture debate. I mean, I could talk about. There's a multitude of different things that go into, like, you have to do like a assessment of multiple factors that might lead to the development of psychopathology. But as it relates specifically to nature versus nurture, generally it's 50-50. In some cases, I've seen like 60-40 on the side of genetics. We just don't know enough yet. We're learning. It's a science, right? So like as we approach the evidence, we're taking what we know already with a grain of salt. We're attempting to critique what we know, and we're adjusting based off of what we learn. So yeah, but and it's really interesting too, the way that they find out whether or not certain illness, like mental disorders or psychological disorders, are related to genetics, and if they have a genetic component. They do that with twin studies. So you'll take identical twins who have the same, like, or a lot of the shared DNA with one another, and they'll see if they both developed similar psychopathology. So for example, you might have identical twins who both develop autism spectrum disorder, which is linked to genetics. And the way they're able to find out that it's linked to genetics is because they look at identical twins who both develop autism spectrum disorder at a higher rate than like fraternal twins, who maybe grew up in the same environment, but because their DNA is different in a lot of ways, and their genes aren't as shared, one might develop autism spectrum disorder, one might not, or both don't. Does that make sense? So like that's how they figure it out. Now, if there's no like relationship at all, then they'll say that it's probably not related to genetics in any sort of way. But like in the case of autism spectrum disorder, through twin studies, they're able to identify, okay, if identical twins develop autism spectrum disorder at a much higher rate, at a statistically significant rate in comparison to fraternal twins, then it means that there's a genetic component that makes it more likely for them to develop that disorder. So that's how they do that. But yeah, so like that, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Related to nature and nurture?
Yeah.
It's always both. Like there's
Sure.
always both.
Sure.
But generally it's considered 50-50, 60-40, and it depends. And there's ways to determine whether or not nature plays a role.
Where does personality come into this? Is that what we're talking about already to some extent, or is that kind of different from psychopathology?
Personality is associated with psychopathology. So I mentioned earlier, I'm taking a class called Personality Disorders right now, and because I'm in the middle of the class right now, and I don't want to get things wrong, I'm going to speak very, very much at a simplistic level.
Grain of salt, everybody.
Yeah, because I'm just definitely nowhere near like a credentialed or like able to educate people on this.
Yeah.
But
it's okay. We won't be having anyone with a PhD on Bigfoot talking about Bigfoot later on. So don't worry about it.
No, that's good. But basically personality is related to psychopathology in some instances. So personality disorders, and there's a lot of controversy in how they're categorized in the DSM. So they take the categorical approach, which basically means you either have it or you don't. So you either have borderline personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, or you don't.
Is this with the 5 out of 9 theme too?
It's similar, but it's different.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the professor that brought that up in this course. So yeah. But the idea is that really personality disorders are more interpersonal disorders, which basically means it's more of a relational disorder. So like, for example, somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, some of the characteristics or criterion for narcissistic personality disorder are that it affects either yourself or others. Like you're you're causing a problem in other people in your life because your narcissism is affecting other people's well-being, or it's affecting your own well-being. So, for example, like as it relates to personality, if you have like an extreme score in a certain trait of personality, then that's cause for intrigue as it relates to personality pathology, because it's not like it's not as if like how do I say this? It's not as if like if you are a narcissistic individual at times, you have a narcissistic personality disorder. It's extreme. Like you score way above the average for like a certain trait. And there's a lot of different criteria that go into it. But yeah, personality, it's a very difficult subject matter because there's not a lot of research on it, which is why it's difficult for me to say things, because I'm trying to be careful and make sure I'm saying only what is right, what is true.
Sure.
You know? Yeah, but personality, like in the same way we were talking about nature versus nurture, yeah, personality is involved in that too. So a lot of people don't like to hear it, but yeah, genetics play a role in personality. It's true. Like to the same degree as I was mentioning earlier, about 50 to 60% is genetics. And they figured that out through twin studies. That, you know, adopted, like in a household, you have someone who's raised, you have a biological child that's being raised, and you have an adopted child that's being raised. What you'll find is that the adopted child has more in common personality-wise with their biological parents than they do with their adopted parents.
Oh, wow.
And that's why we're able to know, okay, yeah, genetics has a lot to do with this. So yeah, that's personality and how that plays a role. If I may though, I'd like to talk about, I'm going to start integrating faith.
Okay.
So this is where it gets really interesting for me. It's my niche, because I love psychology, I love Catholicism, I love theology, and this is kind of where they meet. So psychopathology, we've talked a lot about that. Illness of the mind, mental illness, psychological disorder, right? When it comes to understanding its place in theology and in Christianity, we have to start with the garden, right? So I think one of the things I want to bring up is from Genesis 3, the first sin, original sin. And a lot of people struggle with original sin because it's like, why am I as a baby punished for something that Adam and Eve did, you know, all that time ago?
Sure.
And it's a valid question, right? It's like, why is it that God punishes the innocent for someone else's sin? It's not that simple, right? So let's go to Scripture. Let's go to the Bible, Genesis chapter 3. So right at the beginning, now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Both their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked. Right? There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Here's the idea, and as it relates to psychopathology and original sin. What does the serpent say in the garden? He challenges the trustworthiness of God. And he does that by saying, "Did God say this?" Right? He says, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" And Eve's like, "Yeah, he said not to eat from that tree." And then the serpent goes, "You won't die, for God knows that when your eyes are opened, it can make you wise. You'll know good and evil." And why that's significant is because that's anxiety. That's where it's this wrestling with trust. It's this before the serpent gave this option or inserted this doubt into Eve, there was complete trust. There was, okay, here I am in this garden. I have this relationship with God. God's my creator. And therefore, who else do I trust? Right? There's no one else here. I don't have any other conflicting viewpoints. So I trust God. And then all of a sudden, you have this other voice, this other, right? That says, well, did God really say that? Or, and that's the questioning aspect. And that's what anxiety is. It's excessive worry over the future. It's, what's my next move going to be? Am I doing the right thing by doing this? Is this the right decision? And that's what happens with Eve and Adam in the garden. It's their first encounter with anxiety. It's the first instance of like a disorder of the mind, right? It's the first time that there's a bad pattern of thinking, that there's a disordered pattern of thinking. And that leads to sin. That leads to choosing other than what is good. And that's what happened with Adam and Eve. And as it relates to anxiety. And I think that's really important because anxiety thwarts our ability to trust. And if anxiety thwarts our ability to trust, what does that say about our relationship with God for those who are anxious? I am a very anxious person. That's a part of me. That's something I struggle with. That's something I wrestle with. And it's been a problem for a lot of my life. And because of that, it's been difficult to trust people in my relationships, whether that's my family, whether that's romantic relationships, whether that's friendships. I've struggled with trust a lot of the time. And that obviously also extends to God. It's like, there are times where you doubt God's trustworthiness. And it all goes back to the Garden of Eden. And so the reason why I connect it to the garden and to original sin is to say it's not necessarily that the sin itself, you are being punished for committing the sin, but because Adam and Eve fed into anxiety persisted in humanity. And we experienced the effects of anxiety. So anxiety was present in the garden when the serpent introduced it. Anxiety is present today. And so in that way, I experience original sin. Because I'm confronted with the same sort of lie that the serpent told in the garden. I experience that today. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why we're affected by original sin.
So that's what's going on theologically.
And psychologically, yeah.
And psychologically. So that's what I was going to say. As we're talking about, I think you were saying like all parts of psychology are also biology, right? So like on an actual biological level, the anxiety that we feel of our ancestors of generations before us for like say a singular event, can we feel that anxiety in our own lives? Is that passed down genetically?
Yeah, there are genetic predispositions for anxiety. Yeah, that's true. So yeah, that does play a role. I mean, it's anxiety is a negative thought pattern. So it's not necessarily that anything is neurologically wrong with your brain. Like there's no like injury per se, but it's the negative thought patterns are what affect you and your ability to approach situations. So but some people have a stronger proclivity to develop the psychopathology for anxiety than others, and that does play a role genetically. But it also plays a role in nurture, and maybe you've experienced or you've been given a lot of reasons not to trust. You've had experiences with people who have broken your trust, and therefore you are more prone to, developing the psychopathology for anxiety. And it is important to note too that just because somebody has a higher genetic predisposition to anxiety doesn't mean that you're like doomed to get anxiety, because your nature typically is what will bring about the anxiety. So you might have in your genes a gene that is related to anxiety. But if throughout your life that gene is not activated, like you haven't been given a reason to be anxious, or at least to a degree necessary or like worthy of psychopathology, then you won't experience that. Whereas somebody who maybe has a very low genetic predisposition, but has experienced a lot of encounters with anxiety, they may develop the psychopathology for it.
And will my perception and ability to think about it differently like triumph over maybe my genetic dispositions?
Yeah, so treatment for anxiety, yeah, definitely. So that leads me into the next topic, which is, so we talk about psychopathology, we talk about the fall of man and how it relates to psychological dysfunction. And it's why, it's so important, is because if the idea of Christianity is that you're to become more like Christ, then if there are psychological roadblocks to becoming more like Christ, you would want to have those relieved. And here's the beautiful thing, is that God has already introduced and designed us in such a way that there are solutions to these roadblocks. And that's what psychotherapy is. So the field of psychotherapy, clinical psychology, the treatment of psychological disorders is evidence-based. For the most part, evidence-based. And we determine what works to treat certain psychological disorders. And it's not like they work as some form of magic. It's like God designed us in such a way that this is what enables us to help each other. All right, yeah, so kind of circling back and recapping a little bit, psychopathology. So, and as it relates to, yeah, actually, I'm going to pour some ginger ale. As it relates to your relationship with God and sin, right? Let's imagine you're standing here. God is right here, right? So I'm this Zevia ginger ale, and God is this poured Zevia orange, which he's not, but like just for our purposes, I think he's a little bit greater than Zevia, but I'm this cup, God's this cup, anxiety's in the middle. If anxiety is a roadblock to trusting God, because there's this negative pattern of thinking of like, well, if I trust God, only bad things are to come, or or maybe I have this experience where when I've trusted God, I felt like my life has gotten worse or it's gotten more challenging. Then the anxiety component is this loop, this cycle of this negative pattern of thinking that's like, well, now you can't trust God ever because one time it went wrong. And more anxious people are more likely to develop those negative patterns of thinking. So it's like, what do you do now? If I'm here and God's here and anxiety's in the middle, and my anxiety, which is a psychological disorder, is affecting my relationship with God, then that means that there's an issue here, right? There's something that needs to be solved so that I can better my relationship with God. And that's where psychotherapy comes in. And that's why psychotherapy is so important. Because you'll hear a lot of Christians and like also people in like the red pill space, as I mentioned earlier, they'll say things like depression doesn't exist, anxiety doesn't exist, just like man up and like,
just go out and work.
Just go out and work. And there is, but like what people don't realize is like going out and working is actually a form of psychotherapy, right? Is like it's not as if therapy is this like magic.
Sure.
These are real things that are like, we have evidence that they work and that they help people get through their struggles. And so that's what psychotherapy is. That's why it's important. It's recognizing, hey, sometimes you need a little bit of help to remove that roadblock. And God designed us that way. And that's what's so beautiful, is that God designed us to help each other in our distress. Without one another, we don't have the capacity to approach life's struggles and challenges. And so, I think psychotherapy, if you think about it in the sense of the Garden of Eden, where you have the serpent, who, Satan, who he's known as the father of lies, which means that he's the one that plants the seeds of anxiety. He's the one that plants these distressing thoughts and patterns that are affecting you. If he's the father of lies, then psychotherapy And the way that God designed it from a biological perspective, from a human perspective, is the confrontation to the father of lies, right? So treatment for anxiety is confronting Satan and his army. It's confronting spiritual battle. It's saying, I'm reclaiming my thoughts for myself, and I'm handing them over to God. And that's, if you can view psychotherapy in that way, as being integrated with faith, and that's one of the reasons why I want to become a therapist, is because I want to be able to integrate my faith as a component of my practice. And I recognize that therapy is not something contrary to God. It's not something that is, it's not magic, it's not voodoo, it's not like, it's something that is natural. It's naturalistic. It's something that God designed us in such a way that we can take advantage of these things to help us improve. In the same way that medicine, a lot of medicine, natural medicines, are created from things that exist that God created, and they help people in their illness, and that's a good thing. Same thing with psychotherapy. The evidence-based practices that are used are practices that work because God designed it in such a way that they work, And so an example is anxiety. And I love using anxiety, one, because I struggle with it, so it's something personal to me, and I can speak a little bit more to it than I think other things, is like, how do you solve anxiety in psychotherapy? Exposure therapy, systematic desensitization.
Okay.
So that's the idea that in a controlled space with a trusting relationship, and that's important to therapy too, is this one of the most important markers of success in therapy is what's called the therapeutic alliance, which is the relationship that the client has with the therapist. You have a bad relationship, you have bad outcomes in therapy. If you have a good relationship, you have good outcomes in therapy. Generally, that's the case. So that's why in your approach to anxiety, I'm not saying like if you have maybe in anxiety, a lot of anxiety like is phobias or like irrational fears. So like let's say you have a fear of flying. You probably shouldn't throw yourself on a plane like right away. You know what I mean? Because that's not going to be as effective. But there's in psychotherapy and exposure therapy, it's systematic desensitization, which is that, okay, let's take a controlled approach. Let's start with something easier and let's work our way up to something more challenging. But yeah, the way you combat anxiety, the way you treat anxiety is by exposing yourself to the thing that makes you anxious. So Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, and I want to bring it up because I think it's a brilliant connection, is that in the desert, when Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, they're complaining about being attacked by snakes, right? And what does God ask Moses to do? He asks Moses to lift up a bronze serpent on a staff, and the Israelites will look up at that bronze serpent. So what is the purpose of that? Because to me, this is evidence of psychotherapy in the Bible, right? Which is why I think it's so cool. It's psychotherapy enacted in Scripture. If they're complaining about their fear of snakes, of being bitten by snakes, if that's the thing that's harming them, what does God ask them to do? Look at the snake.
Show an image of the snake.
Look up to the snake. Confront it. Confront the fear. Don't avoid it. Because avoiding your anxiety is going to make it worse. But confronting your anxiety, again, like I said, in a safe manner, is actually going to treat it. You're going to become more capable. You're going to recognize, like when the Israelites look up at that bronze serpent, they're going to recognize that their struggles, their anxieties, they're actually not as bad as they were before. So what happens with a lot of people is maybe you have a fear of heights, or like let's use enclosed spaces. So what you might do is try to go in an elevator with your therapist. And then that's your confrontation of the fear. And then once you get out of the elevator and you've done the thing, all of a sudden there's this confidence, like, hey, I did that and nothing bad happened to me. You know what I mean?
And it helps having someone that you trust around as well?
100%. Because you don't want to distress someone to such a degree that you're causing other psychological problems. You know what I mean? Like, it would be completely inappropriate to just throw somebody who has a fear of enclosed spaces into, like, a crowded elevator. Like, that is not how you do it. You start them off maybe by approaching the elevator, and then the next time you walk inside the elevator and then maybe come back out. And then the next time you approach it, you go into the elevator, let the doors close, and then you open the doors again. So, you want to build confidence steadily, step by step. You don't want to throw somebody off the cliff and, they die when you throw them off the cliff. Yeah. You want them to be able to approach their fear with confidence. And
well, it's kind of like, it's basically just like riding a bike, right? You put the training wheels on first. You put the training wheels on first. Your dad's holding on to the bike while you're on the training wheels. You go a little bit, then you say, okay, I don't need the training wheels anymore, but Dad, can you still stay with me? You go a little bit further, and then you say, okay, Dad, let me try it on my own. You fall, maybe you fall a little bit, but you realize, okay, it doesn't hurt, so let me just keep going. And
you build the confidence, and you push forward. And the evidence is pretty strong when it comes to exposure therapy. It's really, really good for anxiety. And so there's a healing factor there. If you struggle with a lot of anxiety and a lot of trust-related issues with God, and you confront those issues in a controlled manner, all of a sudden, your ability to trust God improves. And that's where therapy comes in. Is you have this, maybe you yourself are convinced that you can't trust God, or that you can't trust your friends, or that you can't trust anybody. You're not going to recognize how to confront that most of the time. Most of the time, you're going to need somebody to guide you. You're going to need the father to, with the training, to put the training wheels on the bike, to hold on to them before they get moving. And that's why therapy is so impactful, is because when people are trapped, they don't know how to necessarily get out. Sometimes you need somebody to show them the way. And that's why therapy is so important. That's why it's so valuable. And that's why people like Andrew Tate, who say, just do it yourself, it's like easy for you to say maybe, but not for others, right? Yeah. Because, and sometimes too, what you'll see with depression is that people will have major depressive disorder and they struggle with it substantially, to the point where their depressive symptoms are keeping them bedridden. They have no motivation to achieve or do anything in their life. How is the symptoms of depression are such that you don't have motivation? But if you're someone like Andrew Tate and you have depression and you're listening to Andrew Tate say something like, just go out and be motivated. It's like, well, the thing that's causing me distress is also causing me to not be motivated. And you're telling me to do something that's impossible. And so what happens a lot of the time is someone might recognize that you're depressed, or you might recognize that you're depressed, so you seek help. And then that person is able to find ways to bring motivation into your life. And that might not be something that you're capable of doing on your own. And in extreme cases, you may even need medication, like an SSRI, to like balance the chemical system of your brain such that you're able to approach therapy. And then once you've at least gotten that far, then you can start to phase out the medication. So yeah, I mean, like, I think it's so dangerous, the field that says, depression's not a thing. Mental disorder is not a thing. You just have to go out and work. You just have to do this, that, or the other. Or those in the Christian space that say, you just need God, right? You hear a lot of this in Protestant circles too, where it's like, you just need the Bible, nothing else. You just need Jesus, nothing else. It's like, God created us for relationship with one another, right? He commands us to love one another. And it's not for no reason. It's because when we love one another, we heal one another, right? And that's what therapy is. It's the science behind healing one another. It's the science behind helping one another and lending one another a hand to deal with their distress. And I think it's so beautiful that God designed us that way,
And then can you put into the perspective of the fact that we're humans, we go through lives where there's struggle, and we need to place trust in God, but connect it now to the fact that God isn't just this heavenly figure. No, he became human.
Oh, yeah.
He became flesh. Now he's walking amongst us. How does that change the human approach to, good health, the human approach to salvation, the human approach to being happy, or to know that you're able to deal with any sort of conflict or problems that arise? How does that all play?
Yes, the incarnation is so important, right? Because as I've said before, your thoughts matter. Your perception matters, right? So when you think of God only as invisible, it becomes difficult to associate physical things with spiritual things, right? Because it's like spiritual stuff is over there. It's in heaven. It's amongst the stars. And physical things are here. This is where you get Gnosticism, right? Is the idea that, well, all physical things bad, all spiritual things good. But that's not the case. And the incarnation is proof that that's not the case. When God became man in the incarnation, when Jesus, the divine Logos, became man, 100% God, 100% man, he became the bridge between the spiritual and the physical. And what that does for us from a perceptual standpoint is see God. Jesus says, when you see me, you see the Father, right? So that invisible God that you knew, you are now seeing the visible manifestation of the invisible God, right? In Jesus Christ. And it's one thing to say, yeah, God loves me, the invisible God who loves me, right? Because then you just have the atheist that says, well, what about the flying spaghetti monster in space that loves me? But with Christianity, what distinguishes us from every other religion and every other faith is that God became man. Is that God isn't the flying spaghetti monster. He became man. He entered into creation. And because of that, we're able to see the ideas that are expressed spiritually. So bring to the crucifixion, for example. Like I said, it's one thing to say God loves me. It's another thing to see God die on a cross for the sins of humanity, because that's an expression of love. And when you see something like that, when you know something like that, your perception strengthens. Because we don't have blind faith as Christians. That's not a thing. You know what I mean? I'm not Christian because I just was raised Christian or was born Christian, I guess you might say. I'm Christian because I actually believe these things happened. I actually believe that Jesus was a man who lived on earth, who claimed to be God, who, through eyewitness accounts, died on the cross, was buried, and resurrected. And I believe that those are real historical events that actually happened, that can be substantiated in historical accounts, that can be substantiated throughout biblical archaeology and all these different facets. And because of that, it strengthens my faith. It's not a blind faith. It enables me to trust. And that's why the incarnation matters, is because, the way your mind works is like when you see things, you do believe them. And that's true. I mean, obviously, there's an element of faith that you need to take a leap. That's part of it. But it's not the full thing. It's not like you're blindfolded and you are just expected to jump from one side of the cliff to the other. It's like maybe beforehand, you know that there's a cliff, that there's a gap that you're going to have to jump across, but you know because of evidence or information that the cliff is jumpable, right? So at least you might be taking a leap, but you're not taking a leap without knowing that you know it's possible, is what I'm saying.
So for those who have been hurt by their parents who demonstrated wrong faith, those who have been hurt by maybe figures in a church who have demonstrated the evil of the human condition at times, for those who've experienced those wrongs and want to reject religion and don't want to have, or maybe just afraid to have a relationship with God, what are the training wheels for them that they can get on the bike again? What do we tell those people that have experienced so much wrong, have their own evidence of this isn't going to work for me, how do we otherwise tell them that it can work out for you? And even when you do put more trust in and things still go wrong in their lives, how do we reconcile that?
I'll start off with this because I think it's a very simple commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love one another as Christ has loved you, right? As Christians, the simplest thing that we can do is demonstrate our faith in love. And when there is brokenness, when there are people who experience pain, as you've just described, maybe from their family, their religious institution, the best thing that we can do is set a positive example. Because then it shows them that there's not just one path, but that there are other paths that lead to a better life, that lead to love, that lead to God. And so that's like the theological argument. From a psychological standpoint, it's social support and relationships. So, yeah, the idea is that when we love one another, we heal. And this goes back to what I was talking about with the mind-body connection, is that research is pretty conclusive that your relationships and your social relationships impact your health. And so if you have positive social relationships, you're probably going to experience health benefits. If you have negative social relationships, you're probably going to experience poor outcomes in health. And specifically, again, it goes back to perception. So someone, like, let's say I have one friend, right? I have one friend, and to be honest, that friend like doesn't really do much. Like, they don't actually provide me much support. But I think that they do. Like, I perceive the support is available to me. Then I'm still going to receive the health benefits. That's impactful. So even just the thought that God, that I have support from God can actually improve your health. Just the thought, the perception can improve your health. So that's one place to start. But like I said, that's not always possible because of bad experiences with family, bad experiences with religious institutions. So what we can do is be that person in someone's life that gives them a reason to trust. Be that person in someone's life that gives them a place to confide, that gives them a reason to be hopeful. And in that, they become more likely to approach their distrust in God, for example, or in other facets of their life. So practically, what do you do? What's the take-home message for Christians? Love one another. Be trustworthy. Give people a reason to have faith. Demonstrate your faith and give them a reason to have faith. I think that's the most effective thing. Okay. And therapy can do that, right? Like, for those who feel like they have no hope, and this gets into something that I want to talk about too, which is how do we destigmatize mental health in the church? That's a place to start, right? So, like I said, some people might not have the friendships. They might not have the relationship with their family or with their religious institutions that might enable them or give them a strong example of support and what that looks like. And so what we can do as a church, as a collective, is destigmatize mental health. We can encourage people to seek therapy. We can encourage people to say, therapy isn't just for people who, are down in the dumps. It's for everybody. Everybody can come to therapy and receive something from it. And it doesn't mean you have to see a therapist for a year. Sometimes you can just go for 1 or 2 sessions and see if it's something that's for you, and maybe you'll find that it's substantially beneficial to you. And I think if we as a church, in kind of a similar way to the Eucharistic revival, where we have 70% of Catholics who don't even believe that the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ, right? something like that, where we recognize that a lot of people in the church don't believe in mental health or mental disorder or, psychopathology, we as a church might create a mental health initiative and say, attending to your mental health enables you to become a better Christian. It doesn't take you away from God. It gives you the tools necessary to build and strengthen that relationship with God. And if we can do that, then people who feel like they have no support can seek support. And they feel more empowered to seek support. And if they can go to therapy, they can find that one person that's willing to be a testament that good things are to come. And sometimes it just takes that one person, to inspire that in them. And sometimes it doesn't, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So you can either live your life never confronting your anxiety, never confronting your depression, never confronting the things that bother you, or you can take a shot and you can say, you know what? Let me see if this is going to work for me. And if it does, it might enable you to be stronger in your faith. It might enable you to be a better Christian. It might enable you to love stronger, and to receive love.
Your capacity to love.
Your capacity to love and to receive love.
Yeah.
And I think that's transformative. And I think we need more Christians in therapy who are therapists, right? To demonstrate this effect, I think we need people who are more willing to seek therapy in the church. I think this falls a lot on clergy, right, and the Vatican, to recognize the importance of mental health and how poor mental health can distract you, can take away from the ability to develop a relationship with God, and recognizing that that is a significant problem. And that if we as a church advocate for mental health, if we advocate for therapy, we are creating a safe environment for those to confront their distress, their mental distress, and therefore develop and strengthen their relationship with God and become better Christians. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to the field, is because I recognize how impactful mental health is, and recognizing also how confronting my mental health has enabled me to be more like Christ, and how my poor experiences with mental health has taken away from my relationship with God and has caused me to fall into sin or to fall into poor habits that are not conducive to my flourishing, And so that's something that I'm very passionate about. And specifically, too, in the field of marriage and family therapy, which I think is absolutely essential in our time. Because I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think it was St. Maximilian Kolbe that said that the biggest target of the devil is the family.
Right.
And I think that's absolutely true. You see brokenness in families, the immense divorce rate, and how that psychologically affects the development of children in being raised in families with divorce or poor relationships in their marriage. And so if I'm recognizing, it's kind of like I want to stand on the front lines. I want to be a part of that therapeutic relationship and enable people to have the tools necessary to build their relationship with God. But I want to do so in the family, because I know that that's where it's needed most right now, is in the family and in relationships.
It's a foundational block for, like you said, for the family unit itself, but also kind of how you're talking about the sociological part of psychology. That creates a foundation for the society as a whole, right? The family, and like a healthy family can also provide a healthy space for the community.
Yeah, where the family goes, so too does the community, right? The family is the fundamental building block of politics, of the community, of broader society. And so if you have a divide in the family, you have a divide in the community. If you have a divide in the community, you have a divide in the nation, you have a divide in, it extends to the world. And so you start small, you help people build and foster strong relationships, You help them out of their distress, and as a result, you get stronger families, you get stronger communities. You get stronger communities, you get stronger relationships with God within that community. And that sociological component is like, well, the family down the street has this wonderful relationship with God. We want that, you know? And that might empower somebody and enable a family to seek therapy, and they might receive the benefits, and it's a chain reaction. It's an effect that impacts people on a sociological level.
So this is our understanding of
Biopsychosocial?
biopsychosocial, but what was the other, the mental health one? Psychotherapy, I guess?
So psychotherapy is like treatment of psychopathology.
Sure, psychopathology, there it is. So this is our understanding of it now, and I have one more question for you. I'm going to switch to, restart it right quick, and then we'll go into our last stretch of this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so in the final stretch of this talk with you, we've talked about how we have learned more about psychology as a society on a scientific level, and how we can better approaches for other people through psychotherapy. But one thing that I want to ask is, with so much more emphasis and talk about mental health and and wanting it, recognizing that it exists and wanting the best for everyone in society, we've put so much emphasis on mental health.
Yeah.
Why is it not working? Because 1 in 6 children are in therapy. Sorry about that. 1 in 6 children are in therapy. It seems like there's more suicide. Suicide rates are higher than ever. Depression rates are higher, than they were 50 years ago. Anxiety is higher than they were 50 years ago. How come we've put all this emphasis on our mental health, and yet we're seeing such negative effects?
Well, I would say that, one, the society that we live in is, I don't think, I think there's more reason for issues with mental health to persist. There's that component. There's also the component that, we're seeing higher rates of diagnosis of psychological disorders, but we are also, let me restart this. What you bring up is that we are bringing a lot of awareness and attention to mental health, right? And the results of such are that we're seeing an increase in mental health diagnosis. That is the reason. Is that because more people are in therapy, you're getting more diagnosis, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. However, I have heard that even when you look at I understand what you're saying, in the sense
awareness
that
brings
the
out
awareness
more
is diagnosing more, but I've heard studies that have contradicted that they've kind of put controls on that in some sort of sense, where they're finding that the depression rates are like higher with certain controls. I'm not sure exactly how that would work. I can look it up really quick to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would say it's, I think it's pretty solid, like that if you're bringing more awareness to mental health, if more people are going to therapy, there's obviously going to be an increase in the statistical prevalence of psychological disorder or mental health diagnosis, because more people are going to therapy. Now, how do people control for that? I don't know if we can know that, because if people aren't getting diagnosed, we don't have a metric to say that in the past century, there's a stronger amount of people with mental health disorders in comparison to today, because we don't have that data. So I would argue and wager that the reason why we are experiencing a higher number of people diagnosed with psychological disorders has to do with the fact that more people
awareness of it.
Yeah, more people are being diagnosed. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll be satisfied with that. Let's see. One more thing that I was going to bring up though regarding that, I just forgot now. Let's see. man, I forgot. There was something related to that. Let's see if I can get my, because I brought up that 1 in 6 kids are in therapy. Darn, I lost my train of thought of that. I'm not sure what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
ChatGPT here does say that the number one reason would be better awareness and less stigma.
Yeah.
So I would agree on that front. Man, what was the other thing that I was going to bring up? I do this all the time. I kind of forget what I was going to say. And I don't want to end it off on just this.
Yeah, I can, one of the things I want to address too is that it's not as if, again, like psychotherapy, clinical psychology, it's a science. So it's not as if the methods of practice that we use today are going to be proven effective 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So for example, in the early stages of psychotherapy, there was Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytics, right? So that's basically traditional talk therapy where like you have that caricature in pop culture where somebody's laying on a couch, like looking up at the ceiling.
Yeah, that's what that's what I think of when I hear therapy.
Right, that's not what therapy is.
That's not what it is?
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, that goes back to Freud.
Is that most of therapy or
no?
No.
No. It's a conversation. There's different structures of interviewing. You're building a relationship. You're learning about this person, and then as you learn about this person, you become more aware of what they struggle with. And once you are able to have a grasp on what they struggle with, you know there are certain evidence-based treatments for those things. So there are like assessments that are more structured, that are like, do you experience, like, do you have bad sleep? That's like structured interview.
Sure.
And then there's unstructured interviewing, which is like, tell me about yourself. Like, what brings you to therapy?
Right.
You know, like why are you here today? And that sort of thing is usually how people start off in therapy, and then it leads to more structured or semi-structured forms.
So on this approach of therapy, kind of like how you're saying, this is what we know as therapy today is just what we know now, and it could be different in 10, 15 years. So that was my question. I remembered it. Can someone have too much therapy? Can we overprescribe therapy? Is there negative effects of too much therapy?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
And if you don't know,
you could think of one of them is like cost, right?
Sure.
Like let's say maybe for the most part, the distress that comes along with somebody's psychological disorder is alleviated, and they're still going to therapy, like when they don't need treatment.
Yeah.
That's costing the client more money. It's costing the client their time. So there's those components. I don't know if I could conclusively say that like it would negatively harm them mentally. I don't think I could make that statement. But kind of like I want to go back to what I was talking about with like therapy could look very different 10 to 15 years from now. Because like with Freud and psychoanalytic theory, kind of the idea is that your subconscious and the suppression of traumatic experiences to your subconscious is what causes psychological disorders. That's not necessarily how we understand it now. A lot of the approach, the big thing in the literature is cognitive behavior therapy, which basically says that you have certain maladaptive patterns of thinking and you have certain maladaptive behaviors. And if we are able to restructure the way that you think, the patterns of thought, then we can alleviate a lot of the distress that comes along with that. And if we can motivate you towards positive behaviors and away from negative behaviors, we can encourage healthier responses. So cognitive behavior therapy is a very big approach in spaces of therapy towards a lot of different treatments. So, but like I said, 10, 15 years from now, we could find a method that is more effective. Or we could figure out that actually cognitive behavior therapy isn't as effective as we thought it was. Because it takes time for the research to show the results of something, you know? Which is why we determined that psychoanalysis and Freud's theories are, for the most part, not really evidence-based.
So one of the reasons why I brought up the 1 in 6 children are in therapy kind of thing is because it calls into question, like, well, do 1 in 6 children need to be in therapy? You know, are we over prescribing therapy? And so this is the narrative that I heard Jordan Peterson talking about with a child therapist. And one of the things they brought up is, yes, we are over prescribing therapy to children, that most children should not be having therapy, especially if they're only like 6 years old. Like really young.
Well, definitely, but I do think that, and I haven't practiced therapy. I'm not there yet, so I'm sure my experience working would be different. But from what I understand, generally, if like you have a 6-year-old client and you don't see any signs of psychopathology, that you just have one session and that's it.
Yeah.
And like they don't go through therapy. So I think you would need to have something treatable. And maybe that's different in practice. Maybe people like fabricate. Some therapists might like create a problem where there is no problem and then overtreat. But I don't know that. Like, I don't know if there's any statistics about that, so I'm just not educated on it.
Well, one thing that they were saying with the problems of it, and I use ChatGPT here to help like re-jog my memory of it, but they say that the negative effect of over-prescribing therapy is the fact that you're reinforcing negative patterns and that you're over-emphasizing trauma. Because think about it. On a weekly basis, your client comes in, you're bringing up the trauma that they've experienced, and now there's this pattern of reliving this trauma week to week, and you're overemphasizing on that trauma, and so there can be an over therapy.
I think that's a caricature of therapy, though, because I don't think that is how psychotherapy approaches trauma-related disorders. So, like, there are different methods of treatment for, like, trauma-related disorders, like PTSD. So there's I forget exactly what it's called. I think rapid eye movement therapy or something like that. It's a eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR therapy. So yeah, basically the idea is that you're relocating traumatic memories into areas of the brain where it's going to cause you less psychological distress. So like that's an approach to therapy. So the approach is let's make the memory less strong. Let's make it weaker so it's not psychologically affecting you. I think if a therapist is just bringing up the traumatic experiences, you're not doing the right thing.
I'm not sure because obviously I'm not a therapist, so I don't know how it works. But I'm talking mostly in a setting where you're gonna have a kid come in and you're talking to the kid, you know. So like, I don't know, like you like you said, you get to know them. What happened at school today? This or that. You're building a relationship. But then when you get to the meat of the problems, like okay, so what's troubling you in your household? And then like the kid will say, I don't know, like my mother's being abusive and whatnot. And then maybe in therapy, you're just kind of like bringing that up over and over again, or like we always call back to it. And maybe you don't need to create the stimuli in their mind to have to like always bring up that trauma.
I think that's bad therapy. I think like the idea is that if you are someone who is knowledgeable, if you're educated and you practice effectively, like you're not a bad therapist. You're gonna know these things already, and you're gonna know how to approach it.
Maybe it's not what I get that on the side of what the therapist brings up, but I'm also kind of bringing up the fact that obviously when you're going to go into therapy, you're talking about the things that are negatively affecting you. So this process of constantly bringing up things that are bad and negative, that's what I'm talking about. Not the therapist just kind of like specifically bringing up things, but just the very nature of therapy itself. You're not there to bring up good things. You're there to bring up bad things.
Well, but that's the thing, is actually bringing up good things in therapy can be helpful.
Sure.
It's a holistic experience.
Sure.
Like as a therapist, you want to know your client. You don't just want to know their dysfunction. You want to know your client as a person. Okay. And so when you mention like, is it distressing bringing up traumatic memories? Yeah, but unless you bring them up, you don't have a solution for them. So for example, it's like it's like your confrontation with anxiety, going back to exposure therapy. You do have to become a little bit uncomfortable. in order to, in confronting that uncomfortability, long term, you are finding healing. You're finding success, and that's kind of in the same way with trauma. Is like, if you just suppress your trauma, if you just avoid it, it's going to continuously come back and haunt you, and that's something that you can't avoid. But if you bring it out into the open, and you hand over to, like as a poetic language, to hand over your trauma and to bring it out into the open, gives you the opportunity and your therapist gives you the tool sets to learn how to navigate it. Because pushing it away is only going to make it worse. Bringing it out into the open, is it going to cause you discomfort? Is it going to be somewhat painful? Yeah, because you're going to have to confront those experiences, those memories. But long term, you're going to feel more confident that you can approach them. You're going to seek treatment that's going to help you, so that when you relive those memories, you know what to do to manage your reaction, your stress. So I think is therapy like instant solution every time? I only need to go to one therapy session and then all of a sudden I'm cured. Like in getting a vaccine, or like in going and getting a doctor prescribe you medication. No, that's not how therapy works. Therapy it's a long process. And a lot of the success has to do with the relationship you build with your therapist, the therapeutic alliance. Sometimes it takes years of seeing a therapist in order for success to develop, but it does develop. And like, people should be more confident and aware of the fact that psychotherapy isn't just like, it's not all like theory. Like, there is evidence that suggests that certain things are effective and that they do result in treatment, or that they do result in positive outcomes. And so I think if you have that trust, if you're able to be patient in that process and work with your therapist, that you are going to find success and healing most of the time. And again, there's so many different variables that affect it. Like, your relationship with your therapist matters. If you don't have a good relationship with your therapist, if that therapist can't connect with your client, then your outcomes are going to be affected by that relationship. And so finding a therapist that works for you is important. All of that's important. Bad therapy affects outcomes. Bad relationships affect outcomes. And that's where, like, as this being my field, as this being something I want to go into, that's something I want to be cognizant of and be aware of the fact that a lot of the responsibility falls on us as therapists to make sure that we know what's best for our clients. And know, like, if maybe we receive a client and we know it's not going to work, like the relationship isn't going to help them, find them somebody who they would be a better fit with. And it's the same with healthcare too. Like, when you talk about medicine, like, some people have doctors who they've been seeing their whole life, so they have that relationship, and because of that, they feel more trusting in that doctor to tell them about some maybe uncomfortable problems that they're having with their health. It's the same thing with therapy, and it affects it affects the outcomes. All of that stuff is important. It shouldn't be minimized. It's very important how the therapist practiced, how the relationship develops, stuff like that. Yeah. Wow.
Well, I think the big takeaway is that there's a huge holistic approach to psychotherapy,
It's a developing science.
Biopsychosociology, or
biopsychosocial model.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like the model, the approach that we take, that we look at disorders with. Yeah. Like, it's a recognition that there's not one thing.
Yeah, you can't chalk it up to one thing.
Exactly.
It's all holistic.
Yeah.
Well, Porter, we are over 2 hours on this conversation of psychology.
All right.
That was probably one of the most comprehensive talks I've ever had about psychology. Wrapping that up, is there any? Do you want to tell the viewers anything with regards to anything more about with regards to psychology, and also tell them where they can find you if you want to share that, like Instagram or YouTube channel, if you have any upcoming projects, just anywhere they could find you?
Yeah, I think here's a message that I want to to give to people. I'm kind of just coming up with this off the top of my head.
Sure.
So, if you feel like the world is caving in on you, if you feel like time and time again you have no escape from distress, from depression, from anxiety, from mental illness, you feel like there's no way out, you feel like God hasn't heard you in your cry, know that it takes time. Know that all things will be revealed, that all suffering has an end, that it has a purpose, that it's not meaningless, and know that your ability to love one another is healing. Your ability to listen to somebody when they're sad, when they're distressed, to give them a hug when they need it, to approach somebody who seems like who appears alone. Those sorts of actions, those acts of love, are therapeutic. Mm-hmm. And the science that I study, psychology, is the science of compassion, of love. It's the science of how do we use the psychology of relationships, of our ability to help one another, through the lens of evidence, through the scientific lens. How do we find the most effective way to help one another? And this is core to your faith, because if you want to learn more about how to love, if you want to learn how to be empathetic, how to be compassionate, psychology is a great place to start, because it teaches you how you think, it teaches you how your behavior and how your patterns of thought matter. And it's helped me in my life. I feel like I've become a better person because of it. I feel like I've recognized and have been able to humble myself in a lot of ways through learning about psychology. And it matters because without that understanding, I don't have the same capacity to love that I do now. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so my message to people is be willing to enter into other people's struggles. Mm. Be willing to lower yourself to a degree that other people are comfortable confiding in you. Mm-hmm. Be the one person in someone's life that's willing to lend an ear, that's willing to lend their shoulder to be cried on, that's willing to provide the support that someone might need to get through a tough time. Mm-hmm. Because you'll find that relationship you build in giving to somebody is going to, not always, but it can enable you to receive as well. Mm. You might find healing in helping someone else heal. Mm. There's a reciprocal relationship. And so, yeah, I think that's basically my message. Therapy is not contrary to God. Mm-hmm. Therapy is a science focused on love, focused on healing, focused on mental health. And being able to break down those barriers, those distressing emotions, those negative emotions, enables you to become a better Christian. It enables you to strengthen your relationship with God, and it enables you to be more available for others in their relationships with other people and with God in their lives. Mm-hmm. And it starts with you, you know? Mm-hmm. It starts with you. It starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with you. So, yeah, I think that's my closing message. I don't think I have anything else to add.
All right, and do you want to share a YouTube channel or socials where people can find you? Or
yeah, sure. So I have a YouTube channel called Lens of the Kingdom, and at the moment it's pretty dry. Mm-hmm. It's kind of something I've sidelined for a little while because of life and school and work and everything. But I do plan on uploading to there in the future. I plan on doing like motivational speaking. I plan on doing like psychological and theological analysis of TV shows and movies, viewing the world through the lens of the kingdom, pop culture through the lens of the kingdom, stuff like that. I do have one episode on my channel right now, which is a talk that I was able to give for our Catholic club here at UCI, and that specifically talks about the movie Pinocchio and truth. I think if theology is something you're interested in, or learning about Christianity and how it's influenced popular culture, if that's something that interests you, I think you would really like that talk. So yeah, just look to that in the future, Lens of the Kingdom on YouTube. And yeah, that's basically where you can find me.
All right. Well, thank you, Porter. Thank you for coming on. That was a great comprehensive talk of psychology. And of course, we're going to have you on again. And I look forward to
Awesome.
the next conversation. But yeah, man, thank you very much.
I think can they look forward to like aliens, Bigfoot,
Aliens, Bigfoot,
Sasquatch,
whatever
Yep.
may come to be.
yeah.
Hopefully we don't already find the aliens by then. You know, I want to be
Right.
able to talk to them before they're here.
Well, maybe you can have the aliens on
The podcast. We'll sit with them.
Yeah, you can have them try Zevia.
That would
change
be-
their whole world.
That'd be really funny if it was just you, me, and just some random guy in an alien suit. Okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
But thank you everybody for watching, and we'll hope to have you again. Thank
Awesome.
you, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I'm looking
it.
forward to it.
All right, guys. Peace out.